Welcome to Escapists Anonymous, the fantasy fiction book club. I'm Dan.
And I'm Sam. This is a podcast for people who love to read and who read to escape into worlds of magic and adventure. But don't let that adventure end when you finish your book.
Join us on Escapists Anonymous to carry on the conversation.
All right, another episode, another new book, and new actually means new this time, because this is the first time where really we've done a book that's just been freshly released. Up until this point, we've been catching up with various other ones that have kind of grabbed our fancy, but this is a hot off the press release. About just over a month ago, it came out.
Indeed.
And it is The Devils by Joe Abercrombie. Abercrombie?
Abercrombie. Oh, I haven't got my version with me. I've got my beautiful...
Your version's even nicer. Mine's just a standard hardback, but yours is very fancy.
Got the broken binding, all the artwork on the edges and additional artwork inside. It's beautiful.
Saying that, like even this one's got some beautiful artwork in. Look at these.
Yeah.
Absolutely lovely. On both sides.
Really... With the standard hardback release, I think has gone up in quality, hasn't it?
Yeah,
recently?
I mean, I bought this was the cheapest version available because I'm tight, and and it was still looked really nice when it arrived. I was like, oh, I mean, when I showed the pictures, you asked, you were like, did you buy a fancy version? I was like, no, I would never.
On principle.
Yeah,
not.
pretty much. I mean, because I love it when you show me all those fancy books, but unless I accidentally bought it. I would never plan on getting one of those. So Dan, this was one that you said we should have a read of.
Yeah, I guess I should put out there that I'm starting from a point of being a big Joe Abercrombie fan.
Yeah,
massive fan of the first Law world. Have read, most of the books in that world. I still need to catch up on a few, but yeah. So I'm probably starting from a point where I'm starting from a point where I have kind of lots of expectations about the type of writing, and Joe Abercrombie being the lord of grimdark fantasy, and I guess this is interesting in that context, I think.
Yeah, and for me, I was given the first Law trilogy by someone and insisted you must read it, and I really enjoyed it. I had to take a break because I was reading through and I was like, this is I just need a bit of a break away from this world and this vibe because it's a bit full on. So I knew I liked Joe Abercrombie, and with this, The Devils sounded like a really good concept. I think I've tried to avoid seeing like opinions of the book.
Me too.
But I think when I was searching around, because I was like, what are the names of the brothers? Blah, blah, blah. And it brought up a few views, and I saw a few snippets. And it seems like some of the fan base are like, not his best work. Which I thought was a really interesting take, because for me, and this is just as a headline thing, is like, this is my favorite of his books, considering that I've read what is supposedly his best trilogy. I know that people say that some of the other books are within some of the other series are amazing, but This was much more my tone than first Law trilogy.
Yeah, I think and I wouldn't try to argue necessarily that like everybody should like grimdark fantasy. I do think it's a kind of a mood that you have to be up for, and like not everybody is going to go for it. What I love about the way Joe Abercrombie does it is that, and increasingly, I actually don't think that the first Law trilogy is the best trilogy. I think the Age of Madness, which is the most recent trilogy in the first Law world, is his best work, because he's added more and more humor to his writing that makes that kind of grim dark narrative feel a lot more fun. There's this, I think it's so inherently like British as a sort of, gallows humor type of thing is the way I would describe most of that type of humor. It's like things are crap, but we make a joke of it because that's what we do.
That's a really good point.
I think this steps even further away from that into like it's dark, but it's not necessarily grim, I don't think.
Oh, I was going to say it was more grim, but not so dark.
Well, we can battle over semantics. Maybe that can be the theme of this episode.
What new genre has he invented?
Yeah.
So, before we delve too much into the details, because I feel like we're really itching to get going on discussing this, new book, new blurb.
Yeah.
So, may I?
You may.
Europe stares into the abyss. Plague and famine stalk the land. Monsters lurk in every shadow, and greedy princes care for nothing but their own ambitions. Sometimes only the darkest paths lead towards the light, paths on which the righteous will not dare to tread. And so, buried beneath the sacred splendour of the celestial palace is the secret chapel of the holy expediency. For its congregation of convicted monsters, there are no sins that have not been committed, no lines that will not be crossed, and no mission that cannot be turned into a disastrous bloodbath. Now the hapless brother Diaz must somehow bind the worst of the worst to a higher cause, to put a thief on the throne of Troy and unite the sundered church against the coming apocalypse. When you're headed through hell, you need the devils on your side. Yeah. Not bad. I mean, it keeps it very much to the opening premise.
Yeah.
It doesn't delve off and mention really any future events. That is a tight blurb.
No. Coming apocalypse, I guess, is your sort of flash forward.
Yeah.
I'm not 100% sure I kind of fully recognise that within this book, but
that's the one implication, I think, to future books in the series.
Yeah. Which I guess I should also add that I had thought this might be actually a bit of a standalone.
I'd hoped it might have been.
I think it's basically written like a standalone, which I really loved.
I mean, the book ends.
Yeah.
That's why I'm happy. I'm very happy about that. But it's got the perfect amount of, but there's more. There's always another adventure, another mission to be sent on.
That's the great. It's like the Avengers. It's like we're putting together this band of anti-heroes, and they're going to solve this problem here in this book, and there's always an opportunity to come back to this story in the future, which is great. And obviously we had that little hint in the final chapter towards that.
I think I've seen it described somewhere as like it's the fantasy Suicide Squad. And I think that's a pretty apt description.
Yeah.
But more James Gunn's Suicide Squad with a lot more humor in it.
Yeah.
But Brother Diaz being the only character mentioned there is
I was
going to
say, Alex, it feels like she's really... It's hard, anybody that's read Joe Abercrombie, other than the sort of half a king, half a ward trilogy thing, the young adult thing that he did, most of his books have like several perspectives that we're seeing the story through, and he... For me, like I don't know. Does George R.R. Martin do this as well in Game of Thrones? Have like 6 or 7 or 8 different perspectives that you're
more
really, yeah. So
oh god, there's too many in those books.
So I know that he's a big influence on Joe Abercrombie's writing. So that's obviously he's sort of pulling that through. It's sometimes hard to figure out who the main protagonist is. I would say that it's Alex.
Yeah, I mean, I've a few chapters in, after we stopped just seeing from Alex and Diaz over and over again, they started bringing in, Jacob and Vega and Sonny. So it was like, oh, yeah, this is an ensemble piece. And, Alex and Diaz feel like the two co-equal main characters.
It was quite a long time before we brought anyone else in, wasn't it? I thought we were just going to have a sort of 2-perspective story, which would have been quite different for most of Joe Abercrombie's writing. It
sets them up as like these two main characters, because there also are lens into the Devils. Everyone else has already been in the Devils and knows all about their thing. So it makes sense to have us viewing from those two. And then as we get to know them, because of course the first chapters where we meet the Devils, they seem like these terrifying, evil beings. And then the moment we start getting their perspectives, we're like, oh, they're a bunch of odds and ends and broken people, and they're a lot more human than, we were led to believe.
Yeah.
And that's, it's effective. So yeah, they're all gradually introduced, but by the end of the book, like, you're so endeared to so many of the characters that, you know, it feels like there's almost like an equal amount of weight placed on, I'd say, most of the group, not all of them.
It feels important to have resolution like across the piece.
Yeah.
And that I think that's what Joe Abercrombie is very good at, because he writes characters so well that you do care what happens to all of them, or you're interested at least in what happens to all of them. And I think we, you know, obviously we get resolution. The devils are, you know, in the like they're in like a sort of cell in the boat, aren't they? On the way back.
They're on their way back to
Rome, and like it's, you know, you get that sort of discussion that they have, like, this is what we are, this is who we are.
Quite a sad tone to be after all the success of the surviving that massive attack at the top of the Pillar of Troy, and then for them to just be like, well, at the end of the day, we have committed a buttload of horrible crimes in the past. So just because we just put someone on the throne, it doesn't make up for anything. And Jacob is, you know, the one who kind of voices that the most frequently throughout, because he regards himself as an inherently evil person. Yeah. You know, I think one of the most interesting character arcs for all of that is Balthazar.
Yeah.
You know, I wasn't really expecting, when we started seeing things from his perspective, I really wasn't expecting to feel like his was one we're supposed to be on board with. But, you know, he goes through the horrible attempts to break the bindings, almost tearing the world apart, summoning a demon, which was fantastic.
Yeah.
And then he realizes that, oh, the Pope is the second coming. That means the apocalypse is on his way. I'm committed to this because I want to be on that side. I don't want to be on the world-ending side.
Yeah, but I love the angle that he's a man of science, and like scientifically, he has seen enough evidence. Yeah, that like I can't not believe that that the Pope is the second coming. Yeah.
So, if only we had such obvious signs in the real world. But. Yeah, and then, of course, like, he comes back onto the boat at the end and goes, that's it, no, I'm all committed. And they're like, put him in chains. He's like, you really don't need to do that. I'm happy to go back. And he's like, no, you're a piece of crap, back under. And you're like, oh, I hate Ziska. And then I'm finally at that point going, for all of his arrogance and, you know, his you know, the way he detests pretty much everybody else, he's developed a camaraderie with these other people, and he's also been wronged. You know, he's just been, you know, forced back into slavery when he was quite happy to go along and be like, I'm signed onto the mission.
Yeah, there's sort of several moments, aren't there, in that transformation, and one of the most powerful is like how devastated he is when Vega kills Baptiste. Yeah. Massive spoiler alert for anybody. Well, I mean, we should always do a spoiler warning, but like he other than Vega, who is obviously also mortified at what she's done, like Balthazar is the most upset about that, and it kind of it sort of brings him into, like, he's not separated from the rest of the group anymore. He's like, he cared, I guess he had sort of slight, you know, he thought he was flirting with her at times. He wasn't 100% sure.
And some of that was really good, where when he was just like walking along behind her, being like so angry at her, he's like, oh, and then I'd push up against the wall, and then we'd start kissing, and then he goes, what? And then she just looks like, goes, what? And he's like, nothing, I didn't say anything. And that was a really good bit. I mean, we'll probably talk about this a bit more, but that was one of the bits in the book where I was like, oh, that's a scene from a film. That's written to be portrayed, and the way that dialogue. But I think going back to, like, you know, the death of Baptiste at the end, and, you know, Balthazar's story arc, you know, the way their friendship develops into this kind of, you know, it's almost like a sea romance going on, you know, like not the A or B ones, but all the way back there, you know, the two of them becoming, you know, adversaries, reluctant friends, and then there's this kind of almost, you know, chemistry between them, and then she's taken away. Is a really nice little thing. But then I think there's so much of this woven into the book. None of it feels overwhelming. There's loads of plots going on, and by the end of it, I don't feel like any of the characters had too little substance within the plot.
No.
You know, the ones that I felt were lesser developed, it kind of almost made sense because they already had their arcs somewhere else, you know, previously. Like Baron Rykard, you know, he's an interesting character because at some points he's just vanished. Like I think in the battle on the boats, he's just not there. And, you know, he's either just drinking loads of blood or he's just like, this is a bit much for me. I'm just going to chill out. But you get a sense of his power. And then when he reveals to Balthazar, it's like, look, I stopped trying. I've no intention of running away. This thing doesn't even work on me. I'm just signed up to this whole thing. It's like, oh, because he's already a developed character. He's had these revelations, and he's there almost as a marker towards which Balthazar is moving in his own character arc. And he comes in for the fun bits. He tells his story about the dumplings. People want to give their lives to him when he's weaving his magic. He's a phenomenally powerful vampire, but he doesn't need to go anywhere because he's already there. And this is just his life, and he seems quite happy with it.
Yeah, and like there's a big thing, like a classic. I don't know whether it is like a grim dark thing or just a Joe Abercrombie thing, where it's like my characters don't get happy endings, like. And this was where this book actually felt like a little bit of a deviation from that, because Alex ended up, you know, becoming the Empress of Troy, and Brother Diaz actually really kind of grows into this sort of leader type character. And I wonder whether actually they won't be involved in any sequels. If
they will, there'll be minor characters. But you're absolutely right. Of course, you know, we were discussing this just a few minutes earlier. Like, this is actually the structure. We're introduced to Alex and Diaz. They join into the Devils. They go through this journey with the Devils, and then the Devils leave them behind at the end of the book. And, you know, the rest of the Devils all go back to pick up more people. You know, and having lost one of their own along the way with Baptiste. So, you know, it makes sense that Alex and Diaz are the two that get the happy endings, because they're the two who were almost external to the Devils and then came out the other side having survived the ordeal. As the two who enter into the Devils and then leave at the end, what did you think of Alex and Diaz as these two characters?
So I think the interesting thing for me about them is that whilst there probably are two protagonists, technically speaking, because, you know, as we've talked about in previous episodes, like they give us this like human lens to view the world through. Like, I doubt they'd be anybody's favorite characters. Like, and that's I guess maybe that's a luxury of having 6 different perspectives to see the story through. But Diaz has a great. I think he has a great character arc. I think he's sort of, you know, the opportunity to come in and put his administrative skills to work and like demonstrate actually, you know, this is where I contribute. This is where I can kind of, you know, be effective and help win the battles. Like that was great. Alex, I really liked in the context of her relationship with Sonny, but I also felt a bit indifferent at times towards her. I was sort of maybe hoping for a little bit more growth throughout, but I think this is Joe Abercrombie possibly just subverting my expectations, where, you know, the big reveal that she had stolen the identity of the real Alex, and you would see in several other Joe Abercrombie books in the first little world, a lot of the stuff he focuses on is that people don't really change, and like I think Alex is like that. The lens she views herself through is like street thief,
rat,
and like it's very hard to change how you view yourself. So she's just a fraud, and she continues to be a fraud throughout.
Yeah, but then I think she comes to learn how that can be a strength. At the start of the novel, she's scrabbling for survival. Alex takes the steps, she knows she can't fight, but she does her best. But the stuff that she does pick up on is so that she can be presenting as a princess. And people comment on it when she arrives in Troy. She's learned how to read and write. She's learned like the basic history so she can reference stuff. She's very adaptable. And that's the kind of character I get. So yeah, she doesn't necessarily grow, but she learns how to use a lot of her strengths in the new scenario. And she spends the whole journey learning how to use those. And it's all about the image. It's all about, how we make it look. It's the symbolism. It's the theatricality of it. That's all that really matters. And that seems to be a recurring theme throughout his writings about how he views monarchy or, imperial power. It's the symbolism. It's not necessarily the genetics, the bloodlines that matter. It's about, whether the person on the throne has done the right moves and actually can be a good ruler,
Yeah.
Her survival skills, everyone in the book has their moments where they come to the fore, and hers, similar to Diaz, is at the end of the book. Because, and I like this idea that the devils have their role to play, and they're almost they have a set formula of who needs to be in the devils. And this even applies to Diaz and Alex, because they're fairly useless throughout, but when they get to the end goal, that's when they come alive. Alex has learned to adapt and can be this kind of malleable person who can conform to what the expectations of an empress is. And Diaz is the one who's like law, legal, property values, all this kind of stuff. He'd absorbed all the administrative bureaucracy that he needed to in the 48 hours they had, and could unleash this tirade of, step back, Duke of wherever, you can't have this land. In fact, you owe us money. And it was a really cool scene in almost exactly the same way as when Viga's tearing through something. It's an equally impressive skill, and I think Abercrombie does a really good job of conveying that. Yeah,
and I feel like Viga and Sonny, if we, my opinion, saved the best till last. Firstly, we didn't even get a Viga introduction until about a third of the way through the book. It felt like. So you think you've met everyone, and then, but I guess that there's this sort of cage that they're traveling with, that there's something inside, and maybe there's a hint.
And you hear the reference to it with the Pope being like, "Oh, she carries you around on her shoulders. I love it."
Yeah. But yeah, so Viga is just, I guess, the sort of comic relief character. But I struggle to kind of pin her down, because I think a lot of the time a character like that wouldn't work. It would be too ridiculous to have in a sort of a fantasy book that you want people to take seriously. But she just works. I don't know. What did you make of her? Did you like her character? Because I think people love her because she is this kind of outrageous personality, and
she's pure id, isn't she? Just go. I think the scene where she's taking the bucket to the river to get the water, they'd really amped up her ability to focus beyond those few moments because of her trauma and the way her brain works. She's like, oh, and that was my mother. Oh, and that was when I killed that guy. Oh, where's that bucket gone? Anyway, it doesn't matter. Oh, I'm feeling really hot. I better give him the water. Oh, whose bucket is that? As it goes past. And I don't think they could have kept up that pace of characterization for the rest, because afterwards she becomes a bit more relatable and a bit more understandable, and that was kind of a full-on moment just to really tell you this is what Viga is like as a character, and there was a really funny scene. I thought it was really good, but again, tinged that sadness of of course I wasn't that bad before the bite, was I? And that being that recurring thing of she's unsure of how terrible a person she was before the bite. But very enjoyable character, really fun and funny, but also as with so many of the other characters, absolutely tragic. When she's reduced to this crying, quivering wreck on the floor, and you see this is why she can't have memories. She doesn't want to have memories, because if she sits in them for too long, it will crush her. She becomes this,
where you've got all of these people who, or some of the people who obviously have dark histories and kind of chastise themselves all the time. She's this incredibly forgiving character for everybody else. She forgives everybody else's sins, which is this sort of, big link to the Catholicism stuff about everybody living in sin, but she provides this kind of very forgiving lens to other people.
But that's probably arguing like, well, is it even called Catholicism in this world, or is it just called East versus West or something like that?
Yeah, it's not, but obviously it's
it's the analog of it.
Yeah.
But I mean, it kind of says that the pagan's the most forgiving because, Joe Abercrombie's kind of saying maybe Catholicism is actually about holding grudges and really retaining stuff. And, the fact that, Balthazar's looking for redemption and he achieves like, I saved the world, I did this. And they're like, yeah, but we're not going to forgive you. Yeah. Sorry if you thought that like doing something good and realizing the error of your ways. Salvation's not for you.
Yeah,
it's not for anybody really. It's just that because you've done such bad, we can really, never treat you like a full human being ever again.
Yeah,
and that's kind of what we're seeing with that. Whereas, partly as a result of her background, but also because she's not tied down with that religion. Vigor is just like move on, throw it over your shoulder, keep on moving, don't look back.
Yeah,
but I think as well, the characterization of her with, worrying about the muzzle and trying to keep a handle on it was really good because, it just that implication of this darker past and like the Vega who we might have met, 40 years ago. Or I forget how old she actually technically is and how she ages, but like maybe she's only like 20 or 30. But it seems the implication is it was quite a little while ago that she was, before the bite. She was a horrible Viking who was absolutely horrendous, like killed women, children, anyone who got in her way. We know that she's not a good person in the kind of like very binary sense.
Yeah, and I guess that actually the seventh perspective that we get that I'd forgotten about is the wolf.
Looking for that good meat.
Looking for the good meat, which we meet before we meet Vega. But yeah, I really enjoyed the wolf is kind of a really good snippet of Vega, like the way it starts chasing its tail at one point.
Yeah.
Like it's, like it just has very good moments of, it's different enough to be like a sort of transformation, but it just retains these little bits of Vega that you're like, okay, stupid.
She's still in there somewhere, and that's why we know that there's that crossover between the two characters. They're not entirely separate people.
And shagging the Dane wolf as well.
So good. Because you feel like with the hunt led by Duke Sabas, when it's happening, you're like, oh man, that werewolf and werewolf fight's going to be insane. How's it going to go down? And then he completely undercuts it by going, oh no, they just have sex.
Yeah.
Like, and like I think from the timeline of that event, that's almost like a day. They find her like a day later. And
she sort of wanders back up to them, doesn't she?
Yeah.
Yeah, I loved Vega. And then moving on to Sunny, who I think might have been my absolute favourite character. Just this sort of sadness, but mixed
my heart
in.
Broke for her.
Yeah, but also mixed. Like I loved the way she kept trying to make people laugh. Like I'm all ears. Like the way she keeps trying to use that joke, and that classic Abercrombie, like no happy endings really is what Alex really wants isn't to be Empress in the end. It's to keep Sunny with her, and obviously can't. And that is like really, really heartbreaking at the end.
Yeah, that's the one reason why I want Alex to be in a future novel, so that Sunny can eventually be with her.
Yeah.
Because, it is quite tragic that, and for it to just kind of move on from that, in the next, if there is another novel of this, if Sunny dies, never gets to see Alex again. She's one of the ones who could potentially, but I think because there'll be elves in the future novels, she'll have to hang around. But, I'd hope at some point she gets released and she gets to be with Alex, and that can be her overarching goal for however many novels she's in. Yeah.
Obviously there was lots of talks of elves and them being, savage and eating humans and blah, blah, blah. And obviously our experience of Sunny as an elf is like totally different to that. And it makes me wonder if there is elf involvement in a future episode, whether they will be significantly different to what their reputation
Well,
is.
I mean, we're seeing it through a very human lens a lot of the time because, you know, they're talking about, oh, when they came to that city and they entered through the walls and it was all silent because they'd strung up every single human and they're all just dangling, skinned or whatever it was. You know, there are actions that make the elves seem, you know, savage and, you know, so alien to us we could never relate to them. And Sunny is the reminder that's probably not true, almost certainly not true. It's not because she's been domesticated by humans. She was always going to have an element of that. And let's not forget that Jacob, his memories are also of him doing quite equally horrendous things that, you know, seem to be only something an elf could do. But
the same
you know,
same goes for Vega.
Yeah,
you know, prior to the
undoubtedly the elves are a horde. You know, and you know the book that wouldn't burn, the book that broke the world. You know, we learn about so many other species of creatures that we've misjudged them, and it seems to be a similar thing. In this series.
And turns out when people are at war, they do horrific things.
Yeah, and they might dehumanize their enemies so that they can, you know, justify it more.
Yeah.
So I'm intrigued about whether Sunny is the only elf that can turn invisible, because, you know, when someone seems to comment at some point going, "Oh, an elf that can turn themselves invisible, huh? Okay, so that's not a standard trait of an elf, I guess. So why can she do that? What's going on there? Is it going to turn out there's a certain kind of elf that has these powers? You know, do elves have different powers, you know, depending on different kinds? They're going to be different tribes of elves, and they're not just a single, you know, monolithic mass of evil. Yeah. They're actually like got their own internal factions, and we'll get to see that. Lots and lots of questions. But the good thing is they're all just mentioned in passing rather than offering too much and leaving us wanting more. It's just there for our own flights of fancy.
Yeah. Yeah, It's something to potentially refer back to if it becomes relevant in a future book. But
I think with Sunny and her sadness, when you see, you know, she was treated at the circus, how she's always been hated, she can barely show herself in public. You know, everyone's backstories had a lot of tragedy to them, but with hers, the way it has reduced her to someone who can't really understand humor, can't really smile because she's never experienced happiness. Yeah. Like, that felt like the most tragic of all of them.
Yeah. And I guess moving on, I suppose, to a bit of like the plot related stuff, the way this felt like a standalone was in the way, I suppose, that it did in one book what we often see in trilogies where, you know, bring the big group together and give them a shared purpose and start off on the adventure. That would usually be your book one, and then in the middle of the book they all get separated off and hobbled in various ways and then come back together at the end. And obviously the sort of being separated off part was the sort of convenient romancy type of, we're going to put the couples together that we want to get together. There was 2 chapters back to back, or was it even in the same chapter, where Vega and Brother Diaz got together, and then literally in the next sequence, Sunny and Alex got together, and I was like, oh, is that a little bit clumsy?
It goes back to the whole, this is a movie. Joe Abercrombie has written this to be a movie. Is because you want to have that same vibe happening in multiple simultaneous scenes.
Yeah.
You know, so
you almost cut back and forward between the romances. Yeah,
you cut back and forth between them.
One's a romance, one's a kind of comedic sort of fumble about between a werewolf and a...
Yeah, and it's also when Baptiste and Balthazar are hiding out somewhere else as well, and theirs doesn't go to the same extent, but they're having the same kind of vibe of, like, you know, there's a frisson, you know, rather than any actual outright rutting. But yeah, I mean, I like those scenes because it allowed you to see the dynamics of certain characters come together and develop. And yes, some of them lead to romance, but it's you know, especially because 2 of them involve Diaz and Alex, who are new members to the group, so they can kind of bond and merge with the existing dynamic. I think that's why you have Rykard and Jacob off doing their thing, because it's like, well, they don't need to serve this purpose because Rykard doesn't care. Jacob can't really relate to other human beings.
There's 2 immortal people that...
Yes, 2 immortal people having their own issues. But one of the dynamics I did really like, and it's one that was kind of always just implied, was the friendship between Jacob and Sunny.
Yeah.
Because then, they never have really any dialogue where they talk together other than in fights.
Yeah.
She
sort of
leading
warns
into
him
fights.
about the
Like
what archers are up in the rafters or something.
the element of closeness, it was really kind of nice because, she breathes in, she moves around, she spots everything, and then she can lean against him to breathe out and have a moment, and she uses that as a chance to pass on information to help him. It was such a cool dynamic, and when I was picturing in my head, I was like, that's so cool in fight scenes and stealth scenes, reconnaissance. Like the two of them there is like they've developed this dynamic over multiple missions, and again, don't have to talk about it, but just the fact that this is how they work together.
Yeah.
I was like, that's one of my favorite little bits of the whole book, was just how they work together as a pair.
Yeah. And I think just sort of on the point of plot, one of the criticisms of Joe Abercrombie's writing is often that sort of the plot is very much secondary to the character building. If you think the First Law trilogy, you remember the characters much more than you remember any actual plot that happened. And even as like a massive fan of it, I have to really dig deep to remember what the actual point of the book was, other than for me to like fall in love with all the characters. This felt like there was a very clear premise at the beginning, like you are a group of people that are trying to achieve this thing, and you're going to travel and you're going to achieve it. It wasn't your classic Joe Abercrombie book where like the plot is backgrounded.
Yeah. I agree. I found with the First Law trilogy that what's his face, the ultimate sorcerer guy who's been around for ages,
Baez. I wanted to say Diaz there. I was like, he hasn't done the same name. Baez.
Yeah. Baez. His whole plot machinations, whatever he wanted to happen, I got a bit lost in all of that. Like playing off different factions against one another. I think it suffered because he wanted to write characters rather than plots. And with this one, because you have such a simple premise, like you say, of go there, drop her off, come back, you can just say like, well, each scene they're moving along, so the plot's progressing, they're getting closer. And, I think this is what benefited this book more than the other ones that I've read. I mean, one of the many reasons, why I think I enjoyed this more than the First Law trilogy, because it was just simple and you can just let it have fun in between those 2 points. Every single scene had something on offer. Yeah, character development was existing in the dialogue at all times, rather than necessarily moving forward with, oh, well, here's the thing, but I feel like like I say, the plot carried itself because it was so simple. And, you arrive in your location, you're a bit closer. Oh, one of the brothers has turned up. Let's give this as a chance to use one of the devil's skills to solve it.
It was really well set up in that way because you obviously you had the journey that they had to make, and then you'd set out like, oh, your 4 cousins, all of whom don't want you to become empress, are going to try and stop you along the way. So you've got these kind of instances of jeopardy to face throughout, and then obviously you can throw in the whole act to separate the group into smaller parts and take away their ability to come together as a team to fight off all of the foes that they face, and that all kind of, it was like you say, it's very simple. It's not new, but it works well if you have someone as good as Joe Abercrombie at introducing really fun, like 3-dimensional characters into that experience. And
we've mentioned a few times about movie adaptation, but how much of this is a video game? Each of the brothers are a boss.
Yeah.
With their different lackeys. So, we're in a different phase where these are all the animal monsters. These are the sea monsters. And then you've got the stealthy one where it's like, we're being hunted by a bunch of really powerful hunters. You've got the creepy guy, you've got the 2 twins, you've got the Dane. These are all mini bosses. And then each section culminates in fighting a brother.
Yeah.
And then with the last one, it's not the brother. He's actually seems like a pretty nice bloke. Guess what? It's Severa and her, the surviving Eudoxia coven.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh yeah. I mean, this is that. And, each of the characters is a character you could play as.
Yeah. So having seen lots of interviews with Joe Abercrombie, he's a big gaming fan, but he also used to work in film or TV. So like I read this very much as like almost written with the big screen in mind.
Yeah.
You can see the, Rome, Venice, Troy, like all of these incredible settings to base the story in, and then obviously these battles that, like you say, keep the plot progressing. Really
brilliant set pieces.
Yeah.
I mean, the illusionist house in Venice, really cool. I mean, also that felt like a D&D puzzle. You can't leave the room because you keep looping back into it. You've got to find the thing that's causing you to get trapped and have these visions.
Yeah.
Like all of that worked really well for that. I mean, also a lot of character development happening there. We learned, well, not character development, but plot backgrounds.
Backstory stuff.
Seeing Jacob's stuff and how he dealt with it. Who else was trapped in there? Vega being with her mother. Yeah, really, really good stuff. The battle on the ship, the battle at the inn.
Yeah.
There's so many different scenes. I think because it's a chunky old book. They fit a lot in, and there's so many that I'd want to give dissect each scene and say why it was so good. But
for all of that, though, my favourite scene I think was where they were sat around getting drunk. And you just had those moments where I think it was where Diaz and Vega were off somewhere else, but maybe the others had all met back up.
Yeah.
And probably
after they talked the married couple out of having a war against each other.
Which I'll come back to that because that was one of my major criticisms of this. But there was just a really nice like sit around the campfire and get pissed, and that's when obviously Sonny and Alex sort of get together a
hand
bit.
touch, sharing the blanket.
Except they're way too drunk. But yeah, that was like a really lovely moment. The other big set piece was where Balthazar summons all of the dead bodies from underneath the
big corpse ball.
Yeah, and dragged down which brother was? Yeah, that's it. That was pretty epic as well.
Yeah, I mean, to talk about the brothers very quickly, I like they all had their different vibes. You had Marcian, who was this big lion helmeted, kind of like, I'm all out fighting. And then Constance was like the reluctant, foppish, yes, I am amazing, but I'm lazy. And wants everyone else to do is fighting for him. Sabas being the kind of the hunter, kind of more kind of dark, but then also having the wings, really cool feature. And then Arcadius just being like, ugh, all of that. I just want to, let's just marry and just have our own little separate things.
I think that with Arcadius at the end was like a really nice surprise. I think you're like, okay, what's his thing going to be? Is he just going to be like the master politician type person? That's kind of what your start off introduction. And then it's like, well, actually, neither of us is in an ideal situation here, but we can make this work for each other. And,
when we're at Troy, and it's like, welcome, everyone welcomes the whole group, and the crowning goes ahead. I'm just like, okay, at any point things are going to go tits up. And he just exits, and he's like, Arcadius is here. You're like, oh, he's at the table, he's going to kick off. He's like, oh no, he hasn't. Okay, well, probably after the marriage, it's all going to go horribly wrong. It's like, oh no, it hasn't. Oh, okay, he's actually a really nice guy. And then he's just like, yeah, just as you started to really hope that maybe everything was going to be okay, then the handmaidens turn on you. And when him being frozen and shattered, it really was just a shattering of expectations.
Yeah, literal.
Yeah.
But I'll come back to the couple who went to war over a sort of married...
who owns which bits of land within the larger kingdom.
That for me was just, that tipped over from like fun into sort of silly.
Yeah, I mean,
it just didn't feel like believable in the context of the world where I think it was fine. It didn't like ruin anything for me, but it was just a bit like...
For me, thematically, it worked with the world because he's writing a satire about the medieval kingdoms and Europe and the dominance of religion. When we're in the holy city at the start and you have all the flagellants of people praying, it's such a full-on heavy image.
So it's not so much that. I think that like that's all fine. It's the I hate you too, I hate you, let's all go and have sex. And like that, it was just a bit cartoonish in the way that it got resolved.
Well, it dragged on, it was a way to bring a bunch of the characters back together.
Yeah.
Yes, it did drag on a bit too long, and but I did like it because, they were happy to kill hundreds, if not thousands of people for their own petty squabbles. And it's just the lack of caring. So it almost felt like that little subplot had to go that way, because at the end of the day, of course they'd resolve it over some stupid, petty, fickle thing. And it's not because of a marriage. They're already married. It's just a tiff. And they don't care about the little people. And that's exactly what the aristocracy of medieval Europe were often like. It's like, we'll just use them as our own little things being shoveled around on a board as we go to war with each other. And it's pushing it to that ludicrous degree, because it's not like they're just cousins or brothers feuding. They literally should be on the same side because they're married, and they're doing this just because of domestic disputes. It did go a little bit too far, but for me it still fit with a lot of what my expectations were of this world, because the people at the top don't give two hoots about anyone beneath them.
I think I would have just liked a little bit of a different way for it to resolve.
But to jump into a bit of a criticism with this, there are some bits that I feel do go on a little bit long. The pacing of the opening of the book, where the group gets together and head off, is so tight. And then when it kind of winds down a little bit, because it can't maintain that pace for the entire novel, it was noticeable. I think the rewriting of the opening bit, either he had that fully formed in his mind, or he worked that opening several chapters of getting them out off the quest of Holy City, was so good. Every single second it was joke, and it really set an amazing tone that it couldn't quite maintain for the whole book. And one of the ones that really felt there was a bit of a bagginess was the fight at the end, where the handmaidens turn on her. She climbs out the window. She goes down to Duke Michael or whatever it is,
and then she goes down, then she goes back up.
And it's so up and down. It's like, okay, you've come back to the same place again. It really feels like you could have cut one whole loop out, but you needed to have the revelation with Duke Michael, have the characters move around. You needed to have tightened up the positioning of it. I guess in his head, he knew where everyone was at. He had the vision of what the palace looked like up at the top of the pillar, but I was just like, oh, we're back here again. Okay, well, maybe cut about 30 pages out of this final fight, because all you're doing is running away from handmaidens. And really, you could have just had this fight earlier on, because you were buying time because you hadn't got the other characters in there. But, Baron Rykard, when they decide to go back, he turns into bats and takes ages to get there. Everyone else is pretty much almost there. It's like, why turn into bats? Go with everyone else if it's going to take you so long to fly there. It's...
He was trying to waiting to make the perfect cinematic entrance.
Yeah,
I think that's basically what I kind of took from that.
Yeah, everyone had their, I'm here to save it. Just when you thought everything was lost, I'm here to knock someone over the head or turn up and say a cool line.
So one of my other sort of minor criticisms or sort of maybe just point of confusion is the reveal about Alex not really being Alex and stuff. Mm-hmm. I was a bit kind of left a bit like, huh? On that, because I was like, okay, so she met the real Alex. She died during this kind of plague type of thing. She took her thing, her half a coin, whatever it is.
Yeah, because she thought it was cool or just wanted to have it.
But then she gave herself the same birthmark and started using her name as though it was sort of part of a bit more of a grand scheme. And then I was like, so what was the next part of the plan?
Wait for Duke Michael to find her in an alley.
Yeah.
Done.
Okay, good. So you had the same thought. Yeah. That wasn't going anywhere. It was just
that felt very Pratchett to me. When you've been reading some of the Watchmen ones and they talk about Carrot and his destiny and stuff. She's almost like, oh, this bitch has got a destiny. I better steal that. And it's almost like he wasn't so explicit. Maybe he should have made more of a thing of it, going like, if you find a princess living on the streets, you better take her identity, because it's only a matter of time before someone comes to pick her up and take her back to her destiny.
Yeah, that wasn't put across really, was it? It was just like, I did all of this to assume her identity, but carried on living on the streets and being a thief.
I had hope, because again, the whole point about it's pointless, it doesn't matter, bloodlines are stupid.
And that was fine.
I had kind of hoped that after she said, no, you don't understand, I stole it all, for then someone else to go, actually, you really are, we knew all that all along. You know, just there'll be another flip reveal to kind of against the expectations, but it's pushing it too far. There's enough going on as it is. Maybe it would have been silly, but you're right. Like, he wanted to make the statement about it doesn't matter who sits on the throne, but in doing so, he made it a bit more silly for how she ended up in the situation she was in. I had hoped that Duke Michael was going to turn out to be actually still a good guy. I was anticipating his betrayal and Severus for quite a while. I think as I was partway through the book and we were discussing it, I mentioned that.
Yeah, you put out a couple of pretty accurate theories about where it was going. I'd obviously already finished it, so I just did not react in
Thank
any
you
way,
for not
shape,
spoiling it. But yeah, with Severa, I was like, the moment she arrives, showing Balthazar around the lab, being like, "Oh, she was actually brilliant in an insane and evil way, of course." I was like, "Oh right, well, it's Eudoxia inside her brain." Or something.
To be fair, for that one, I didn't see that one coming. Michael felt a little bit too predictable.
He was too nice. He was overly nice. I do want to talk about Eudoxia because we're told all the way through the novel how she's pure evil and crazy. But actually, when we meet her in Severa's body, she is surprisingly pragmatic. She's like, I'm not going to win right now. And to be honest, I've got the body I always wanted. I was just using the resources of the Empire to give me a non-broken body. So I'm out.
Yeah. Agree to disagree.
Yeah. And I just thought that was a really great way to do that. Just again, because Balthazar had proved himself to be like, I'm so badass. And I've seen through the concept of magic into being, it's all just atoms, but not calling it that. And then she's like, you're pretty powerful. I'm really impressed. And I was like, surely she's going to turn around and go, yeah, psych. But instead, she was just like, yeah, actually, I'm just going to go and you might see me again. Anyway, ciao. Yeah. And then Balthazar's like, but you need to understand, Eudoxia's alive, but everyone just, Zizka's just shutting him up. And it's like, well, that's going to come back in the future. Yeah. I can't wait for that.
It will be really interesting to see what happens next with this. Because there's an easy setup, isn't there? Like, you've got your cast, you've got your world, you're sort of planting the seeds for the future, and
we've got enough world building here that we know there's other options. Like Troy, what a cool city! Huge pillar, massive palace at the top, the witch architects of Carthage. Like the devastation of Carthage. I mean, we haven't even touched upon the fact that the alternate history. Troy won the siege of Troy. Carthage, stopped Rome from ever breaking out, so Rome's not even a thing. It's all based on the Phoenician language. Atlantis is just off the coast of Portugal or Spain. So when they were talking about, there are other missions, like wolves in wherever, witches in Bavaria, like what mission will we have next? I was like, go to the devastation of Carthage, please. Yeah. Go off to Atlantis. I want to see all this stuff. And eventually I want to have a mission up to England to see why it's so horrible and no one likes going there. So I just, those are three stories and locations that he's built into the book that I instantly want to go to because he's just mentioned them in references. So, when we finish up, we talk about whether we wanted to live in this world. It's horrible and it's grotesque and there's so much character and flavor and just detail to this world. I think I'd want to just have a little try living in this world.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Like,
there's a lot going on.
Again, there's always the caveats of it depends who you are in this world, but there's a lot of horrible sounding pilgrimage stuff going on. But
I feel like wherever you were in this world, something interesting is going on.
Yeah. Like you say, living in Troy, just that setting just seemed unbelievable.
So cool. What a great city.
Yeah. Yes, it's a yes from me. And would you recommend this?
Oh, 100%. I already have.
Yeah.
I contacted the person who recommended me to read the first Law trilogy, asking if they'd read it yet. And they were like, no. I was like, well, you're going to love this one.
Yeah.
Because it's really fun.
Yeah, definitely. And I actually think if grimdark is a bit too grim and dark for you, then this is like at the very, very fun, light-hearted end of that. And it is
so accessible.
Yeah. And it's action-packed from the very beginning. You're not having, whilst it does the character work all throughout, you're not having to do that at the front end before we actually get into any kind of plot. It's really kind of plot driven. Like I think it does mark a little bit of a sort of move away from his first law world type of story, but absolutely loved it. Very minor criticisms on a couple of things, but you know, because of the podcast and the way we read books, we're sort of looking almost a bit too closely at stuff like that, where it didn't in any way impede my enjoyment of the book. So loved
definitely.
it.
I think, you know, with the limited experience I've got of Joe Abercrombie, this is the thing I've enjoyed the most. Like, instantly got into it, happy to power through this, and you know, a couple of weeks, it was a very enjoyable read from start to finish. If this is a development of his style, as you think it might be, I'm happy to see him keep going in that direction. Yeah,
I think it is. I still lean towards the grimmer, darker end of it, just because those are my tastes. But but I absolutely love this, and his writing style, if you love Abercrombie anyway, is absolutely recognisable within this.
Yeah.
So it's like, you know, potentially the best of all worlds if you want Joe Abercrombie, but something a little bit more joyous and hopeful. Not like totally joyous. Relatively speaking, yeah. But yeah, so we would love to hear your views on The Devils, Joe Abercrombie, very recent release in the last month. Lots of people have been reading it. I've been seeing on social media. It's a big release this year, so I'm sure there's lots of opinions out there, and we'd love to hear them. If you're watching on YouTube, you can leave a comment down below. Please also like and subscribe, etc. If you are wanting to get in touch on social media, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, just find us at Escapist Anonymous Pod and drop us a comment or a message. Yeah, we're really interested to hear what all of your views were.
Next episode, we're going to be, just as a heads up so you can get reading, we're going to be covering The Book of Doors, a novel by Gareth Brown. It is another fantasy book about why books are magic, which seems to be something we've covered a bit on this podcast. But you know what? Authors seem to like books and like saying that books are magic. Who knew? It's like when a filmmaker says, you know, makes a film about filmmaking.
Yeah, there's a romance. There's a romance that people have with the medium. So, but yeah, looking forward to getting stuck into that, and we'll be back in 2 weeks if you're listening in real time with that episode. And we look forward to speaking to you then. Thanks for tuning in and listening, and all that's left to say is goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.